Hello and welcome to this Mobile World Live panel discussion. Today we're going to focus on the progress of 5G Advanced. I'm David Pringle, the moderator for today's discussion. And joining me, we have Chad Donovan. He is Executive Vice President, Chief Product and Strategy Officer at CSG. With him is Igor Gronstadt. He is Senior Director, Technology Development and Strategy at T-Mobile USA. And also we have Peter Jarek, Head of GSMA Intelligence. So thanks all for joining me. So why are we talking about 5G Advanced now exactly? Well, mobile network operators are beginning to deploy the first 5G Advanced technologies. We're seeing that because we've got release 17 and release 18 of the 3GPP standards going through the process and becoming finalized. And those releases incorporate various elements of 5G Advanced. It's also essentially the next step after 5G standalone networks, which create this concept of a cloud-native core network and give operators much greater versatility. So with 5G Advanced, you're combining that cloud-native core network with new radio technologies, artificial intelligence, and other capabilities to make mobile networks much more versatile and capable. And that potentially enables a much wider range of use cases than we've had in the past. We could potentially have faster uplinks, for example, satellite connectivity, low-cost IoT devices, environmental sensing, very high-speed mobility, and other features. So potentially lots to look forward to. So we're going to have a three-part panel discussion. In that, we're going to cover the case for 5G Advanced, also touching on 5G Standalone. In other words, what will it deliver? The second part will look at potential use cases and case studies. And then we'll move on to the challenges and the timeline for adoption. We'll also take some audience questions towards the end of the webinar, but you can enter those at any time by using the box on your screen. But we'll get to those towards the end of the hour. So let's start, gentlemen, with the case for 5G Advanced and 5G Standalone as well. Essentially, why do we need it? Why should we do it? Igor, I'll start with you. What are you most excited about, if I can put it that way?
I think what I'm most excited about with 5G Standalone and 5G Advanced is the opportunity to further monetize the network and delight our customers. You know, being able to have some differentiated connectivity in order to address new use cases. I would say up until now, the networks have been very much of a best effort network. Everybody is treated the same, and if you get into congestion, well, there isn't really any hasn't been any differentiation really. People watching cat video get the same service quality as people who are maybe repairing a wind turbine using XR glasses. And with 5G Standalone and 5G Advanced, we get new tools that gives us the opportunity to more customize the connectivity experience depending on what you actually need, and that gives us further opportunities to monetize the network. I think that is what I'm mostly excited about in regards to this.
Yeah, got it. And Chad, this is happening in tandem with, as I mentioned in the introduction, the development of AI for telecoms and also the exposure of APIs, which is, again, creating potentially a more versatile, flexible proposition. Just give us your thoughts on that opportunity.
Yeah, David, absolutely. I mean, Eagle mentioned it, being able to further monetize the network in real time, being able to ingest that data from the network through those APIs, be able to act in real time as that information is understood about how customers are experiencing service, whether it's service degradation, whether it's service quality, what they're experiencing from that quality perspective, what services they're using. That quality of service experience on their devices, what devices they're experiencing across. All of those things go into how you want to engage with your customers, how you want to monetize those experiences potentially. All of those things can be done in real time now, and maybe they can be applied against a set of AI services that lead to a set of monetization decisions. That all can happen again in real time. So those are things that we are leveraging a set of new APIs against within our monetization platforms, and being applied against these new network APIs. So yeah, it's a new world that we're working against within these 5G networks.
Yeah, thanks. Can I just bring in Peter on that topic, because this monetization of new capabilities has been, something of a fraud issue in the telecoms industry in the past. So monetizing the technologies is an important part of this story, I guess.
100%. I mean, I think you see a nice connection here between the 2 points, and I think we can all agree with Yigal that it's crazy that we're not prioritizing cat videos over wind turbine XR. That we really need to be prioritizing that. But I think going back, right, when we began the 5G era, right, a big part of the story that we were telling was we're going to have one network, differentiated services for different sorts of users, and we haven't quite got there. Right now, part of that is that a lot of operators haven't quite moved on SA, and SA brings a lot of those capabilities. But then, obviously, what are we going to use from that differentiation for? Obviously, it's going to be how do we that's the route to monetization. And AI being one of the being obviously the of the moment use case that we're going to want to obviously prioritize. We're going to want to offer differentiated services for some AI services, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can think about this in a very simple, the analogy to cat videos versus, wind turbine repair is someone using ChatGPT to ask who's going to win the next election versus, which is a silly question because they won't know, to using an advanced AI service to run critical parts of your business, right?
Yeah.
And I think that just goes to the idea that differentiation is how we monetize the 5G networks, which we can't necessarily get to without things like SA, 5G Advanced potentially being a trigger to launch SA, and of course AI being one of those use cases that will really require the differentiation. So I think it's a really good story if we knit all these pieces together.
Yeah, all of this needs to happen in tandem, I guess. Just to finish, round out the capabilities of 5G Advanced, I'm just going to come back to you, Eagle. I mean, there's also, a lot of talk about integrating satellites, non-terrestrial connectivity in with the terrestrial networks, and also broadening the scope of IoT with, lowering the cost of using cellular connections for IoT. Just touch on those opportunities for us, if you will.
No, absolutely. I'm sure you all heard this week we announced our commercial launch of satellite service, which is now becoming an integral part of our connectivity service offering. This partnership we have with SpaceX. So that is very important. It's a relatively modest service initially with messaging and emergency services, but it will cover where there are no terrestrial networks, and we have a ton of good feedback from our customers on that. We have run a beta now for about 4 or 5 months, I think, and really good feedback on it. With lots of customers on it, so that is good, and that service will evolve, and over the years here we didn't mention that we will also have some data services launching a little bit later in the year. I think we said October or so. So that is important. When it comes to IoT, yes, that is also an integral part. Initially 5G didn't really cater very well for IoT services. The idea was that we were going to continue to use narrowband IoT and Cat-M that was defined in 4G, and we continue to use that. But I think the industry and ecosystem as such realized that we really needed something natively in in 5G that is a bit less costly than mobile broadband modems, and skinny down a little bit for various applications. So RedCap, of course, is coming in there to help with that, and we'll have enhanced RedCap coming a little bit later to even drive the cost of modems even further. But I think we are off to a good start with RedCap, which at T-Mobile we did launch last year. And we expect to see a good uptake of devices there. Our big hope is wearables, that we will see manufacturers using RedCap for wearables and get a good uptick in that. So the pieces are really coming together, and we view this, the evolution here of devices into RedCap and enhanced RedCaps going forward to get cost down and be able to adopt those for more and more use cases. We see that as advanced use cases that is part of our story and journey on 5G advanced.
I would just say, just trying to connect some of those pieces, going back to sort of how this all fits with the earlier discussion, and I guess what Chad was also talking about in terms of AI, we've done some work at looking at SA and really what it means, SA and 5G advanced. And if you think about it from an AI perspective, you think about sort of the, all the stuff that Igal just talked about, right? RedCap, making it easier to get low cost IoT. We talk about satellite, right? And obviously satellite will have IoT implications, talking about coverage in new places. Obviously, one of the big selling points for 5G advanced will be improved uplink capacity, right? We know that as we go to multimodal AI, uplinks are going to be strained, right? We've been talking about this for years, right? Video is going to do it as we talk about more uplink video and real-time services. We're going to see this with AI. I think the interesting piece is that as we look at sort of what is critical from a addressing market needs standpoint, things like 5G advanced will be critical to actually deliver on those AI solutions. From the, again, IoT to actually collect data, you need sensor data, data from data fuels AI. We all know that, right? The uplink. I think it all from a story side of things and the capabilities, it already plays well together.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we're going to come on to the use cases a little bit more in a moment. But Chad, if I can just come back to you on a point that I'm curious about. If we see a big expansion of the IoT, and many more connections, are operators set up from a back-end systems point of view to handle that? And do they, they're already processing huge amounts of events and they're processing a lot of data. Could they handle another step change the way they're set up today?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've seen is, especially in the mediation side of the house, is how do you manage more mediation records, moving from IPDRs to XPDRs, all these events coming in and making sure you can manage those records. And so we've been helping a lot of operators, move those mediation platforms to the cloud, start to manage those platforms at scale, being able to scale up kind of on demand as those events and those records are moving up at scale. It's harder to predict. It's harder to predict as these devices come online and more and more records are scaling up. Trying to procure infrastructure kind of on an unknown capacity. When you have people and you're selling devices, you can kind of predict how many records are going to be online. You can kind of plan for that. When more and more things are connecting to the internet, it's harder to predict. And so we've seen the cloud really be an answer for some of that stuff. So you don't have to plan for it as much. And so that's been a nice kind of a nice boon for us to get people to move to the cloud and use that as an infrastructure to scale up accordingly.
Yeah. Dial up and dial down as you need to.
Right.
Yeah, got it. Peter, just one final topic before we move on to use cases, which is this potential to use 5G advanced for high accuracy positioning and sensing capabilities. This sounds a little bit more sci-fi, a little bit more far out. Where does that fit in your view?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's an interesting story there because, and if we look back to the original messaging around 5G advanced, right, and this started coming out, I think from some of the larger infrastructure vendors in the 2022 timeframe and talking about various things that would be possible. Centimeter level positioning was one of the stories, and I think we've kind of seen that played down a little bit, in part because this is now a big story. ISAC, integrated sensing communications for 6G, and so I think there's sort of two parts to that story. One, we want to make sure that we're looking at these technologies as an evolution, right? What can we do in 5G that leads to 5G advanced, and 5G advanced that leads to 6G? And we've heard a number of different industry bodies and operators talking about that, but also just sort of understanding what is the business case, right? Because, great, and I've seen all sorts of cool demos about positioning and what you can do with positioning, but obviously then the question is, how do we monetize that? Who's collecting the data? Who owns that data? How is that data going to market? What are we actually doing with it? And also, I think then the question of what do we need? What are the technical implications, right? To the extent of how well can we do that with existing RAN equipment? Do I need massive MIMO solutions to get to there? Do I need higher frequency spectrum? So it's definitely, I think, definitely on the radar. I think it seems to be getting more play for a 6G world right now. But again, that really goes back to that story of sort of 5G to 6G evolution versus, the revolution.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that, I think, in the final segment of the panel. But right, thanks, Peter. Let's move to use cases. Eagle, I'm going to come back to you on one that Peter referenced, but we touched on, but is this extended reality services, and particularly this idea of supporting things like augmented reality with AI, for example. A lot of potential there. 5G advanced, is that an important part of that story?
No, absolutely it is. We have done a lot of work in that space. There is good opportunities there, both in the enterprise space, and we expect it coming into consumers too. But I mentioned as an example wind turbine repairs. But there's a lot of those kind of use case, and we have worked with several external companies sort of on looking at the inspection type of use cases. And what we learn is a little bit what Peter mentioned. Uplink is critical, and it's latency and and it's throughput, and keeping the jitter constant. That's also super important. Maybe more important than super low latency actually. And we see tremendous opportunities for savings for enterprise customers by having these kind of solutions. If you're doing a building inspection, for instance, and you can superimpose on the drawings on the glasses that you take out to construction site to check and make sure that everything is done to code and following the specs. It's a tremendous savings for people there. And in order to be able to implement these low latency features and the higher uplink throughput features, you really need 5G advanced. And in order to get the 5G advanced, you need 5G standalone. So they kind of go hand in hand. You're not going to be able to implement these advanced features if you don't have 5G standalone. And so that's why the story falls very well into place. And we also, as Peter talked about, AI and mixing AI into this, of course, that's also part of the 5G advanced story and journey here. So they all fit together, and it's very exciting what we're able to do right now, and I see a lot of opportunities going forward for sure.
Eagle, if I just stay with you on that point for a second, I guess there's a lot of opportunities for telcos to use that technology in their own field operations, right? So presumably you could fix your own cell towers, etc., using augmented reality. So how soon is that likely to happen? Because it's the old, are you eating your own dog food analogy, I guess.
Right. We're doing it to some extent, not as advanced that we could at this point in time. It takes time to get adoption, even internally, right? But we're doing some of that for sure, and we certainly are implementing AI into our network to help with operational aspects and getting more efficiency out of the radio network, and that we've been doing for a while. So I see that on the XR, maybe not as much as I would like to see, but the potential and opportunity definitely is there.
Yeah. Peter, let's stay with the topic of wearables for a moment here and the potential for connecting wearables directly to cellular networks rather than via smartphones. We're talking watches, glasses, maybe even body cameras, etc. How many of them do you think are going to have their own SIM cards, as it were?
Yeah, so we've been talking about connected watches, connected devices for horizontal. And a watch is a good example, right? Because there's lots of great use cases, but it's obviously taken some time. And I think it's really just a function of one, right, cost, right? How much extra does that? I mean, and it's the same thing for things like laptops. I mean, how long? We've all been in this industry long enough. We've been talking about connected laptops for years. So much easier than Wi-Fi. Just open up your device and it's there. And I think it's really come down to sort of that question of costs versus value. And so I think that's that's going to be the trigger, particularly for things like watches, which are in that if you're spending 300-400 for a nice smartwatch, that's a decent chunk for a lot of folks now, right? So I think you just have to be able to prove the value, and what is the use case for not needing that. I think to that extent, I think for me, where we're going to see and where I think there's some more interesting wearable use cases for connected devices, it is more around health, it is more around safety, it is more around things that are, you just need to know it works, right? You just need to know that you can put this out there. I mean, had an interesting discussion at a 6G forum not too long ago in Cambridge, and there was a discussion of how basically connected dialysis machines.
Oh, yeah.
Not in a future 6G context, but in a today context, with the idea that you're shipping these things out to folks, and you don't want to mess around with their Wi-Fi configuration. You don't want to have to set this thing up. You just want to sort of ship it and forget, right? I mean, not forget, right? You want to make sure that you actually know what's going on with it, but you don't have to worry about the connectivity side of things. And so I think there's many more opportunities like that, particularly on the wearable side of things, that we're going to see some good applications. I think to the point with RedCap, with eRedCap, and then I think more in sort of a bridging that 5G advanced to 6G side of things, passive IoT. I think passive IoT will be a really interesting opportunity there, just because that brings up a whole new set of use cases that might be done by other sort of low cost sensors right now.
Yeah. So if 5G Advanced solves the battery life problem, then the next challenge is cost and demonstrating the value. And if you've got that, then potentially you've got a lot of connected devices.
And that's definitely where passive comes in, right? From the battery side of things, where then that's really, and that's and if you're out there and you haven't seen some of the demos on passive IoT, it's sort of hard to understand, hard to understand in sort of the abstract, but it's, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thanks, Peter.
David, I think there's some interesting challenges there too that we try to solve. Like, how do you, and some of these passive devices, how do you push entitlements to them? How do you push entitlements to these devices and make sure that they act without a human intervention, and they get the right behavior? Almost in a more wholesale setting, how do you bill for them, and who's paying for them, and making sure that there's the right collection of wholesale service agreements that are collected and paid for in aggregate. So who's managing those wholesale agreements? Who's paying for them? If they're not paid for, how do they get turned on and turned off over time? So those are all the kind of challenges that companies like CSG are solving for, and working with the community to make sure they're being rolled out. We've rolled out an entitlement as a service product that are working on these challenges with the market, and we're also obviously a leader in the space with wholesale billing and making sure that those are challenges that are being met.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the business model, the charging models for a lot of this stuff, because I mean, obviously, if we cast our minds back, we had the Amazon Kindle with its embedded connectivity back in the day. Is that a model that's likely to come back a bit more with some of these new use cases?
I think so, but again, the Kindle was again a consumer device, and I think some of these are, these are wholesale agreements that maybe a fire department is buying a collection of 50 devices, hundreds of devices at a time. So I think we're looking at a lot of these are B2B arrangements that are maybe different than consumer arrangements that are more one to one. So we were just selling a collection of services, then maybe you're selling a direct SIM card to a consumer. So they're a little different than maybe we're typically used to selling them.
And
Yeah,
you've seen some IoT providers already do that, right? I mean, you've seen some IoT MVNOs and some IoT specific providers basically selling a package of, built-in data or a certain amount that goes along with it. So you are kind of seeing that on the low end.
I was partly thinking about the B2B2C kind of approach as well, but yeah, no, interesting. But just in the interest of time, Eagle, I want to come to another use case which we haven't talked about yet, but we should, which is enhanced fixed wireless access. Which it appears fixed wireless access, the markets around the world appears to be growing pretty well. How does 5G Advanced impact that exactly?
Yeah. So we do hear a lot of talks around the world about how 5G didn't really succeed and didn't find its use cases, and maybe fixed wireless access is a bit of a boring use case, but nevertheless, it is an important use case, and it's a use case that makes sense and makes a good business for us, for sure. We've been very successful with launching fixed wireless access. And it's definitely a growing business for us on our 5G network. No, what helps? It's mostly new features and capability that make in 5G Advanced that makes the system more spectral efficient, so that we can get more capacity out of our network and be able to serve more users and better. I don't think we have seen any specific 5G Advanced features that is sort of making any new capabilities per se for fixed wireless access, but it's mostly about the capacity. But having said that, if you look at the how 5G was designed, you remember the triangle or the three-legged stools. It was enhanced mobile broadband, and then it was the URLLC and massive connectivity. Fixed wireless access was never viewed as a specific use case in 5G. So we didn't do anything specific in 5G to cater for the fact that that this device is going to be stationary. So you don't have to worry about that it's moving. It's going to be plugged into the wall, and it can be larger, have better, higher gain antenna. You don't have to worry about SAR requirements. So there's a lot of things that we could and should have done in 5G to cater more for fixed wireless access, and that is sort of something that is a bit disappointing. But fixed wireless access wasn't really a big thing before 5G anyway. There was a little bit in 4G, but now that we know that this is a big opportunity and a growing business in 5G, what we're looking forward at T-Mobile is in 6G. We really want fixed wireless access to be treated as a separate use case from mobile broadband, so that we can take into account all these attributes that I mentioned. And I'm hoping that we can get a lot more efficiency in the network, spectral efficiency, but also other network resource efficiency, signaling resources, and all kind of things that you can eliminate or make simplify when for fixed. So that's something that we will be driving for 6G. So I'm diverging a little bit and looking a little bit beyond 5G advanced, but I see more opportunities there, and we see a lot of traction from others too that want to participate and making sure that we're driving that use case for 6G.
Got it. No, thanks, Eagle. We've got quite a few audience questions coming in, but I want to just cover off the third bucket topic before we get to those. But let's go through this fairly quickly. I'm just going to ask each of you to name what you see as the major challenges or obstacles to adoption of 5G Advanced. So fairly briefly, but just give us your headline obstacles. I'll start with you, Chad. What do you see as the biggest challenge here?
Yeah, I mean, from our standpoint, I mean, obviously we're a vendor in this space, and I think, you know, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I was pretty bullish on, you know, CHF and PCF and all the things we were building for 5G and all the new standards, and hopeful that this new buying wave was coming. So CCS and the new charging systems were hot, and we were excited about what was coming. And it's been slow adoption. So I think the spending trends have been slower than we expected, and I think you know, I think the challenge for a lot of folks is the timelines for rollouts have been slower than we expected. So I think you know, as companies look to scale, you know, they're doing it kind of in chunks. They're looking for use cases that are going to help. They're going to help drive revenue. They're going to help drive top line growth for their companies. And so the things that we've seen have been the things that are going to drive new use cases. They're going to be the things that drive revenue. They're things that are going to help augment. So you know, the things that we're seeing, again, private networks that have been rolling out, things that are going to drive revenue. So we've seen like experience-based monetization use cases, some of those things where, hey, we can differentiate our service, we can help drive new use cases within the network. You know, dynamic traffic volume restrictions within the network, upsell plans for heavy users, like some of those things that we can shape and differentiate our services. Those have been the things that have been most realistic for operators. I think those have been the things that have been helping differentiate the services. But I think that's kind of on the challenge side as well. Like what's going to help us drive revenue at the end of the day, and really differentiate our services.
Yeah, so it's a question of sort of crystallizing or solidifying the business case
That's right.
and actually spelling it out. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Peter, from your point of view, what do you see as the main challenges facing 5G?
Yeah, so I think just sort of piggybacking off of that, right? It's the same challenge of why we haven't really gotten much traction with SA. I think for a lot of folks, for SA, right, there's big costs involved, right? They need to move to a cloud native core. They need to upgrade the core, and they don't necessarily understand what that return looks like, right? And so I think as we think about what needs to take place to get around with 5G Advanced, yes, you don't need SA necessarily for every single 5G Advanced use case, but you probably do. It would be silly. It would be completely silly to not do that. So that's a barrier. You're going to have to launch SA if you haven't already. SA necessitates a bunch of investments, not just in, you know, CapEx, but also doing things differently, right? Cloud native capabilities, expertise in-house to figure out what that all means. And then, of course, you're going to weigh that against what those use cases look like and how you monetize it, right? And to date, that's been an issue, and that issue is going to continue for a lot of operators going forward to 5G Advanced. But I'll say just really quickly, every year when we go out to operators, and we do a big survey every year, and we ask them, hey, how quickly are you going to launch 5G Advanced? There's a lot of interest, right, around 5G Advanced. We asked last year, we've been asking for a number of years before that, SA, a lot of eagerness. So there's definitely an eagerness. That's not the issue, right? It's just the question of weighing up those costs versus figuring out what the use case and the business case is.
Yeah. Okay. No, thanks for spelling that out. It's an important issue. Igor, from your point of view, what do you see as the main challenges facing 5G Advanced?
No, I think Peter hit it pretty well. In my view, there is no 5G Advanced if you don't have 5G standalone, because that's a prerequisite in order to get all these new capabilities into the network. And it's a bit unfortunate that the adoption of 5G standalone has been so slow. T-Mobile, we have had a nationwide 5G standalone network now for 5 years. And so if once you do have 5G standalone, then the adoption of all these other capabilities for 5G Advanced is relatively easy. It's there isn't really any big lift after that. So what is the obstacles with 5G standalone? Well, I think you need enough. You need to be able to allocate enough spectrum to 5G in order to not degrade the performance if you go from NSA to SA, right? That's been one of the big issues, I think. If you can't sort of either, if you don't have enough new spectrum or can afford to refarm LT spectrum over to 5G NR, then it's tough. And this speed, peak speed game, that some of us think maybe is a little bit silly because consumers doesn't really care about peak Ookla speed anyway, but it's out there and it's a thing. And in some markets, the regulators actually go and ask for this to be they actually go and test every month to see who has the biggest peak speed, and then it gets published. And some operators doesn't want to lose that battle, right? If you have had a greatest peak speed for 15 years, you don't want to. So figuring out how you can get enough spectrum allocated on 5G so that you don't lose that, I think is important. And then you have device ecosystem. So since T-Mobile, we went very early with 5G SA. It was a strategic decision that we made. So all of the devices, the 5G devices on our network is SA capable today. We drove that very early. But for operators that didn't do that, and got stuck with millions of non-SA capable devices, and you're sitting there with NSA, well, then it becomes a little hard and difficult to justify putting a lot of spectrum onto 5G if a 5G SA, if you don't have a large installed base of devices that can take advantage of it. So it becomes a little bit of a downward spiral there. So I think it was, frankly speaking, in afterthought, it was a bit of a mistake, I think. Oh, bless you. It was a bit of a mistake, I think, for the industry to go the NSA route. It was sort of an easy way and a little bit of a lazy way, and the industry got stuck with it. So we certainly are hoping that for 6G we will have a different approach where we make sure that we do it the right way and get the real 6G from day one, and with all the features that we needed, all the regulatory features and voice and everything, so we don't have to rely on the legacy system to provide a good service.
Yeah. No, that's important context. And as you say, the devices challenge for some operators is potentially a chicken or egg situation. But
right.
Let's just, quite a few audience questions. I just want to round this out by just getting a little forward-looking piece from each of you, which is really about how much progress you're expecting in 2025 and 2026 on 5G Advanced. And you can take that question any way you like. You can talk globally, or you can talk about your own business or your own region. So, Chad, let's start with you. What sort of progress are you expecting this year and next?
Yeah, I think continued momentum around our 5G product lines. We've invested heavily in those since 2017. We have to invest in advance of each of these network upgrades as the new standards come out. We invest in advance of those standards so our products are ready for the operators to implement those. And I think we were ready as 5G rolled out, and there's a long tail for those rollouts to happen. And I think there's just continued momentum in the industry around entitlements, around charging, around our policy services, around mediation. So I think, yeah, we're going to continue to see momentum around those as the use cases take root, as the implementations continue to happen. We're seeing, yeah, continued momentum in the industry, just kind of across the board. So yeah, I'm positive that yeah, the use cases are taking root finally. We're seeing real use cases hit the industry. That this stuff's finally happening. So yeah, we're positive for sure.
Yeah. You're striking a positive note there. No, thank you, Chad. Peter, let's turn to you. And in your answer, if you can just maybe compare and contrast developed and developing markets, how much progress you're expecting in those two.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think what you see on a lot of discussions, right, is this, great, are we going to move directly to 5G advanced in countries who haven't done 5G yet, right? That's the developing world story, right? And I think one of the interesting things is if you look this year, there's a lot of new auctions and new launches of 5G still taking place, right? There's some most of the major developed markets have, right? But you still have a number of markets where either spectrum's being made available or they're just moving on 5G now. And I think the question is, will they move directly to 5G advanced? I think in some cases they might, depending upon the size of the market, right? So if you look at a market like Turkey, obviously they're a little bit bigger, but device cost becomes such a key critical factor, right? And so I think you're more likely to see, obviously, and going back to some of what Igal was saying, was the whole point of looking at SA, making sure your devices support SA from the beginning, because that's going to be critical, right? So I don't think, and I love this idea of moving directly to what's next, right? Will people skip 4G and go directly to 5G? Will they skip? Will they leapfrog? And that's such a wonderful aspirational view of how we can bring these great services to markets that really require them. Device costs, early infrastructure costs are always a key barrier, and so I think that we will see this continue to be a developed market story over the next 2 years, probably a targeted developed world story. We've got some great cases like T-Mobile US, where they have a great set of low band spectrum where they can release broad coverage from the very beginning. Not every operator has that same advantage, and so it becomes a little more difficult. And so you can do some targeted coverage in the places where you require it: hotspots, urban areas, stadia, those sorts of places where you'll need it, and you can show some interesting use cases.
Yeah. So essentially, it's going to be almost a case by case deployment scenario. Eagle, from your perspective, what's the plan for 2025, 2026?
I would say definitely continuing our journey with catering for differentiated connectivity for various use cases. Call it network slicing, I guess, is what we're doing today. We have a couple of dozen slices defined in the network, but we don't have them commercially launched. We have 3 slices that we have launched commercially, for first responders, T priority, and we have a security slice, and then we announced this video broadcast slice that we're doing with Sony. But we have done a ton of more development with partners. We have done a lot of things at events for point of sales and ticketing machines and things that just need to work, right? And so they want to have make sure that, especially at events, you want to make sure that these machines actually work and take priority over people who are there and watch cat videos or whatever they're doing, right? So it's very important. So we are working hard at this. We're working with some companies doing remote control of vehicles, which is another type of use case, that needs to have a higher priority than regular consumer enhanced mobile broadband. So what I expect and what I am excited about is to see us being able to commercialize more of these differentiated connectivity opportunities by using these advanced capabilities in our network. But we need to go beyond the sort of these static network slices. Once you start getting too many of these, it's going to be unmanageable to operationalize and these slices, and if you get a lot of them, they're going to start influencing each other. So it's like, well, how do you make sure that this new slice you introduce now does not degrade the service of a higher priority slice? So it becomes a bit hard. So we start talking now more about intent-based connectivity, where we actually get functionality into the radio network that make sure that it actually knows what services that it's catering to and makes its own adjustments, and AI will play a big role in this, where you can get much more sophisticated. You need to automate this whole thing as we get successful, essentially get to an autonomous network where we sort of can handle this automatically in the network rather than static as today. But I am excited about the static piece as well. It's a good place to start. We just need to continue to drive the technology forward.
Yeah, you've potentially got a very dynamic environment here with a lot of variables, a lot of moving parts.
Yes.
I get it. Right, let's quickly get to audience questions. We'll get through as many of these as we can. There's quite a few here. And Chad, I'll start with you actually, because this one sort of builds on what we've just been discussing. But with 5G Advanced, you've got all these new capabilities and opportunities, differentiated services, the dynamism we've just been talking about. What's the implications for how operators charge for this? How they approach differentiated charging, for example?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different examples. I mean, we're seeing some, and we kind of call it experience-based monetization, ways you can differentiate monetization based on how people are using the service in real time. We have one example where we use AI to basically do pattern recognition within the network. So it can basically do pattern recognition against data to include throughput measurements, to manage throttle indication, congestion patterns in the network in real time. So this basically identifies two customer segments in the network. Users that consistently experience high network quality, and through that you can upsell opportunities with premium services. And the second, users that experience policy-based constraints like throttling, who might benefit from plan upgrades. So you can do that in real time, send those customers to portals to upgrade services and things like that. So I think those are really interesting use cases. Maybe customers are at an event, a concert or a premium sport event, and you want to upsell them to a specific plan while they're at that event. Those are really interesting experiences. We're doing that within kind of those real-time kind of services like that. So that's one example. We're also doing things within our policy platform. So dynamic traffic volume restrictions, where we can do dispersion analytics within dynamic traffic volume restrictions based on how the volume is being dispersed throughout the network. So there's lots of examples of how we can manage the volume within the network as it's being managed throughout the 5G network itself, and how it's being managed through the APIs.
Yeah, got it. I think the challenge is always to demonstrate that the customer's got what they've paid for.
Exactly.
Particularly if you're offering them a premium service. But, thanks for running through that, Chad. Eagle, I think this one's more probably for you, although Peter might want to touch on it. How will a cellular tower and cellular satellite infrastructure complement each other? How are spectrum resources shared? And is satellite only going to cover remote areas that do not have any tower infrastructure? So multiple elements to that question, but
Right.
if you can be fairly concise, in the interest of time.
Sure. No, in our case, we do use spectrum intended for terrestrial operations, right? That we have licensed for that purpose. We use that spectrum also for satellite, and we do share that spectrum between the terrestrial network and the satellite network, and that is in the US a regulatory requirement in the FCC's SCS rules. They outline that you have to, if you want to keep your terrestrial spectrum, you have to continue to operate it on the terrestrial network on the regular towers. You cannot dedicate it just for satellite use. So we use the same spectrum, and the whole idea is that it is outside of where we provide terrestrial coverage that we will pick up and use the satellite. So of course there is always going to be some overlap, and we will continue to optimize and make sure that those borders work well, and that we don't create interference between use of the same spectrum on a terrestrial and satellite network. So
Yeah,
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I get it. I guess as the operator, because you're orchestrating both services, as it were, you've got some control over that scenario.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I understand. Let's move to another topic. This one, I think for you, Peter. When do you think 5G deployment will reach beyond 75% coverage in the US, Europe, and globally?
That's a great question. So I mean, I think it's a great question from a couple angles, right? So if we look at it as basic question of, so you could look at population coverage, you could look at landmass coverage, heck, you could look at sea coverage. You could look at, coverage of the globe, right? Everywhere, right? So it all depends on that part, right? And of course, there's meaningful coverage, because I think I'm sure a lot of us have been in a situation where you've got 5 bars or 2 bars, or you've got your bars, but you don't actually have decent service, right? So I think we need to look at it in multiple ways. Satellite, as we just discussed or we just heard, will be there to complement it, and particularly as with the new standards, basically supporting integration in 5G. Obviously, that's going to bring population coverage, landmass coverage to 100%, sort of depending on what you look at. If we're talking about basic sort of coverage by population, then the numbers sort of look different, and you're calling out sort of different spaces, right? So we have the US already being at that point, right? So from a population perspective, it's already near full population coverage on the 5G side of things. Thanks in part to folks like T-Mobile USA, who have some great spectrum that can get there. So not going to remove them from the picture to tell you what it looks like without T-Mobile's coverage there. It's a different story for sort of the other parts. If we look sort of for Europe at the end of 2024, it was around 2/3, so right around the 65% mark, and it doesn't hit 75 until somewhere around, let's say, beginning of 2028. The world's a much different story. So if we look at the world, we're there just about the end of the 2030 timeframe. So as we go into 2031, we'll probably get to about 75% coverage around the world, but recognizing that that's all sorts of different countries, including developed and lesser developed countries. So that, I think, points out to that there's a long runway still for 5G, because I know as we get into that Q4 2030 time, we'll be looking at 6G. Long runway still, though, for 5G, obviously.
We'll get you back in 2030 and check whether that was a bang on prediction. No, thank you, Peter. We're running short of time. Igor, I'm going to quickly ask you to answer a couple of these questions that are directly relevant for you. For an operator with high fiber penetration and no significant need for fixed wireless access for mobile internet, what pure B2C business cases, not B2B2C, can we have for 5G Plus and for 5G Advanced other than tariff differentiation? So latency, slicing, security. So I think the question really is, beyond fixed wireless access, what do you see as the strongest business cases for B2C?
For consumer services, we're talking about.
Yeah, B2C, pure B2C is the way the question's phrased.
Yeah, I think gaming is probably a strong one that we believe there's a lot of opportunities for. We talked about XR. It's the whole metaverse took a little bit longer than what we had anticipated. I don't hear anyone talking about that anymore, but I think XR sort of is something that we will see. We see an evolution there of devices coming in that is going to be more less intrusive and more acceptable by consumers, and so I think that will be an important use case that we will see, where we're going to want and need these new capabilities in order to have a good user experience. So that would be a couple of examples, I would say.
Yeah. So I mean, just on that, if you're wearing a pair of smart glasses and you've got some kind of AI agent that you're querying, you need a high-speed uplink to share what you're seeing with the cloud, I guess. So yeah, okay, that's good.
I would just say, I think Chad gave a good example of one that we don't often think about, but it is just giving people the ability to get a priority connection, or give them the reliability and the connection they need at a given time. Right? I think Chad mentioned the buying a special package if you're at an event or something, right, and be able to charge for that. I mean, that requires being able to actually deliver that capacity and deliver that differentiated capacity, right? And I think clearly there's a lot of folks out there who would look for some level of reliability when they're trying to make sure that they get their selfies at a Taylor Swift concert or whatever it is.
Or they're trying to order their Uber home, right?
So that's a perfect. I mean, yes.
It's probably B2B to C though, if we go that route. But yeah,
100%. Yeah, yes.
Right. Well, this is going to be the final question because we're right up against the hour. I'm going to throw it at you, Chad, and then just a brief one. But which verticals are most likely to generate an early ROI for operators?
Oh, geez.
Advanced features. You're the money guy on the panel. Where's the money coming from?
Yeah, I do think it's like, again, it's some of these private network special event areas. Again, we're seeing a lot of these even MVNO, MVNE. We're seeing a lot of those in the markets generate. I mean, that's an early use case that our operators are launching to generate near-term returns on their network. It's fairly easy for them. It's a way to generate new revenue. It's fairly less complex. So I think that's an opportunity for folks to test their network, to stand up and generate returns. So that'd be my advice.
Got it. Good one. Okay, it's already happening. Right. So apologies, we've overrun somewhat, but thank you to the panel for a very interesting discussion. Thank you to you, the audience, for your questions. You will be able to watch a replay of this webinar through the Mobile World Live website, so watch out for that. Questions we haven't been able to answer, and I'm conscious there are some there, we'll, I think, attempt to answer by email. We'll come back on that. But thank you again for your time and attention, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.